Okay, we are going to talk about the 7th house and the 4th house and how to understand charts where those two houses are connected. So we're going to start off by clarifying what the 7th house is all about. It is the area of sky that is centered around the western horizon, and that is why it represents everything that it does. And what does it represent? It represents things associated with the sunset. So one obvious thing about that is when the sun sets, it disappears. And so the 7th house represents the disappearance of things. So the 7th house is a house for traveling, arriving at a destination, leaving the home, leaving beginning, and dispersing, things going away, things going to disappear. Also, since it has to do with arriving at the destination, then it has to do with the endings of things, where the sun sets. And so that's why it's the house of death. Now, most of the time we would concern ourselves more with houses 8 and 6 when it comes to the topic of death. But this is because 8 and 6 derive their meanings by their relationship to the 7th house. The 6th is underneath the 7th house, so it signifies the illness and the disease that brings on death. And the 8th is above the 7th house, so it signifies the vitality and the longevity that puts off death. Another thing about the sunset is the sun is the symbol of ego, and I, and identity, and self. So when it sets, it signifies non-ego or non-self, or in other words, other people. So the 7th house signifies all kinds of things that deal with other people. For example, the important other people in your life, your partners, especially your marriage partner and the marriage itself. How well you deal with other people, how well you cooperate, how well you negotiate, and how effectively you exchange things with other people. So it also has a commercial aspect to it, how well you can trade. That's the basics of what the 7th house is all about. Now let's take a look at the 4th. The 4th house is the area of sky that's directly below our feet. And so that's the basis for everything that it signifies. It signifies everything which is unseen or internal or below the surface. So one obvious thing about that, what's below the surface? Your emotions, your inner being, right? So the 4th house is the house for the quality of your emotions. In other words, your happiness and your mental health or your emotional health. Since emotions are predicated on desires or motivations, the 4th house also has to do with devotion, which is like the apex desire, which leads to the apex emotion, which is happiness. So we'll look here to see how motivated a person is to be concerned with other people. On a similar note, the 4th house is the root for feminine qualities or femininity, which is basically love and concern for others. And hence it's that house for the archetypical female, which is the mother. Now another thing about stuff which is below the surface means stuff you can't see. So it also just means privacy in general. The 4th house is a very private house. So it has to do with our shyness, our modesty. It's not a boisterous, loud, or boastful house. It also has to do with the places where we can obtain privacy. So it has to do with our home and the things in our home, our property. So it also includes vehicles, cars, etc., furniture. And finally, this is the place where we sleep, the place where it's safe and quiet. So the 4th house has to do with sleep. Actually, the sun is in the 4th house when it's midnight. So it has to do with sleep. It has to do with peacefulness, feeling of safety, and quietude. Finally, one other thing associated with being below ground is roots, where things come from, where things grow from. So the 4th house is all about roots, and this has to do with how rooted a person is, how stable they are, and also where they come from. What is their culture like? What is their ancestry like? So now we've gone over what the 7th house signifies and what the 4th house signifies. We can turn our attention now to how we interpret charts where the 7th and 4th are connected. How would you get chart where there's a connection between the 7th and the 4th house? Well, there's a simple way and a complicated way. The simple way is just by observing the lords. If the 4th lord goes to the 7th house, for example, or if the 7th lord goes to the 4th, or if the 4th and 7th join somewhere, or if the 4th and 7th mutually aspect each other. The complex way is to see how the houses line up in their prominence. Which house is the most prominent, which house is the next most prominent. So if you have the 4th being the most prominent and the 7th the next, or the 7th the most prominent and the 4th the next, or the 4th the most and the 7th the least, or the 7th the most and the 4th the least, then you're going to have dynamics where the 7th and 4th are acting up together. Now, it's easy to figure out the simple connections, but it's difficult to figure out this stuff about the house prominence. That's why I call it complex. If you want to do that for your chart, you can get a report which will give you this DNA code of your houses, which will show you the sequence of your house prominence. And you can go to my website, victorcara.com/H to go directly to this report, and you can order it there. I'll also put the link to this in the description below the video. Without further ado, let's talk about how we're going to read or interpret charts where the 4th and 7th house are connected by whatever means. First of all, the 4th is the house of love and the 7th is the house of marriage. That certainly is something which is very resonant. Those two themes are very resonant together. So in these charts, interpret that marriage, relationships, love, etc. is a big thing for the person. It's a very important thing for the person. It's a main focal point for them. And usually that will mean that the partner gets a lot of focus or deference. They put a lot of importance on other people, and ultimately a lot of importance will go into their marriage partner. Another thing about 4 and 7 is the 4th is the house of devotion and the 7th is the house of cooperation. That also is resonating on the same page. So we expect here's a person who cooperates well. They're devoted to other people. They care about other people, so they're going to cooperate well with other people. So expect them to be trustworthy, truthful to people, sincere. Expect them to, especially sincere, because 7 is how you're interacting with other, and 4th is what's inside you. So when these two connect, you're letting other people see what's inside you. They'll also be sensitive to other people. They've let other people into their heart. Their hearts are going out to other people. And they will have this quality, therefore, of listening to people, paying attention to people, and therefore they learn from a lot of people all the time. So they're good learners, they're good listeners. Another thing about 4 and 7, 4th is the house for your home, but 7 is the house for travel, going out, leaving. So this is a clash between stability of having a home or dispersion or instability of going out someplace. So although these are people who put a lot of importance on others and partnerships and relationships and marriage, still they tend to be unsettled. And they tend to sacrifice their security. This will especially be the case if 4th house is going to the 7th, like the 4th lord is going into the 7th house. Or if the 7th lord is dominant in a 4-7 conjunction, or if in your house sequence 7 comes first and 4 supports it. So they'll become unsettled and they'll be risky. They'll like to take risks. They won't care that much about security. And then finally, the 4th is the house for ancestry, which is the past, but the 7th is the house for endings, which is the future, the terminus. So it's really a clash between root and terminus. 7th is the terminus point, and 4 is the root point. So this is why we expect these charts to have, to belong to natives who have major changes between the start and the end, between where they start and where they wind up. So the major changes from the birth conditions, maybe wanting to get away from their roots or having to get away from their roots, moving away from their roots. Now that's the 4th and the 7th house in theory. Let's take a look at some well-known people who have these connections between 4th and 7th house. First of all, Malcolm X and Aretha Franklin. And amongst all the things that we've talked about, these guys particularly typify the 4th one. Pushing changes, major changes, changing from the roots, wanting things to change. Also risking. Then you also have Russell Brand, who's also kind of like that, but Russell Brand also crosses over into this other category, which with Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, and Oprah Winfrey, and people who really typify 1 and 2, the first 2 things that we talked about. Love and marriage, with a lot of focus on other people and a lot of interest in talking with people and interacting with people. Especially Oprah Winfrey is particularly a great listener and learner. And that segues into these 2 people, Copernicus and Carl Sagan, who really typify this, being really tuned into listening and learning. Then we also have Ramana Maharishi, who kind of typifies everything in this list except for the first thing, in the literal sense of having a family, getting married. Didn't care at all about that. He gave all that stuff up. But then again, that really typifies the 4th thing to an extreme. Then we have Tracy Lords, the adult actress. She kind of typifies everything, but especially 3, the risk-taking. And maybe with her you would question the second point, the point about being truthful, trustworthy, because after all, she was cheating the cheaters. So you could say maybe this is very honorable, but maybe not. So it's questionable, and that leads us into the final group of people that I want to bring up today. Charles Manson, Richard Ramirez, 2 super bad criminals. So how do they have this? Maybe you could evaluate this to think, well, they just have these qualities over the top. So much concern with other people that they take out all their emotions on other people. But I think the one thing that's really questionable about these 2, kind of like Tracy Lords, might be, what is this stuff about being trustworthy, truthful, sincere, sensitive to others? This doesn't match at all here. So now we want to look at some of these charts in detail. I want to look at 4 of these charts. I want to look at Charles Manson and Richard Ramirez to see what makes them really not match the second point. And also want to look at Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor, because both of them match this very well, but they have opposite kind of feelings about this. So with Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, both of them are highly focused on partners, which is certainly one of the foundational things to expect when there's a connection between 4 and 7. But Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe have opposite perspectives on this focus. Elizabeth Taylor had multiple marriages where she's sort of using the men, and Marilyn Monroe found it difficult to get married at all, and she has the sense more of being like indebted to the men. So I would say with Elizabeth Taylor, there's a big me focus, but with Marilyn Monroe, there's a big them focus, and I wanted to see why that's so. With Elizabeth Taylor, the key thing is her first lord, which represents self, is also the 4th lord. And it's in Leo, which is a self-oriented sign, and it aspects the ascendant, which is the defining point for the self. So she has a very self-y chart. Plus her 7th lord, which is in the 4th house, which is triggering her to, be an example of somebody who has a connection between 7 and 4. That 7th lord, however, is it's debilitated, but also it's completely combust from the sun, which signifies self. So the takeaway from all these exact points is the context of Elizabeth Taylor's chart is very me-focused. In that context, she has the 7th lord in the 4th house. So although she would be very concerned with partners, it wouldn't be in a Marilyn Monroe or dependent kind of feeling. It would be in a dominant or selfish kind of feeling, you might say. Then let's have a look at Marilyn Monroe's chart. With the partner focus, the obvious thing here is her moon, is in her 7th house. That alone gives a person, or indicates a person who has a huge focus on the partner. And that moon is the 12th lord, which is aspecting the ascendant. So that's taking away from me love. It's detracting from self-worth. Okay, so that's a little detail on Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe. Now let's look at the two criminals. And we want to figure out, why would they have this thing in their chart, which is supposed to indicate a person who's trustworthy, truthful, and sensitive to others. So Charles Manson, the thing which is most important in his chart, the most dominant thing in his chart, is his moon exactly conjoined Rahu, almost exactly at the 10th house cusp. So this is why Charles Manson is basically the dictionary definition for a moon Rahu conjunction. And what do you expect from a moon Rahu conjunction? Can they be trustworthy? They cannot be trustworthy. A moon Rahu conjunction exact like this at the apex of the 10th house, they cannot be trustworthy because they cannot even they can't even be trustworthy to themselves. Their emotions, their desires, their intentions are constantly changing very dramatically. Truthful? They can't be truthful, not necessarily because they're a liar. They don't feel like they're lying, but because their perception of reality is constantly changing and is very different from everybody else's. So a person like Charles Manson would feel like he's telling you the truth, because his perception of the thing is so warped that nobody else would consider it to be true or accurate. So a person like Charles Manson wouldn't feel like he's a liar. He would feel like he's telling you a truth that you just can't see. And sensitive to others is very difficult to have if the moon is so intensely amplified by such an exact conjunction to the nodes, because it's going to put so much attention upon your own feelings, your own desires, your own wants. So Charles Manson has 4 and 7 connected, sure, because there's the 4th lord in the 7th house. But it's in the context of this huge moon Rahu conjunction. For Richard Ramirez, it's almost exactly the same, just on the other side of the chart, on the other side of the galaxy, let's say, on the other side of the solar system. Instead of being with Rahu, it's with Ketu. So he has the moon conjoined Mercury, which is exactly conjoined Ketu, which is almost exactly at the 4th house cusp. So really, it's just a mirror image exactly of Charles Manson. So all the same things that we said about Charles Manson will apply here, and that explains the whole thing. So you see, this is what's very important. It's very important to do astrology in this manner, where you learn the theory of how things work, and then if you learn the theory in the right way, then you're already accustomed to how things morph as they combine together. So you can do these type of things more easily. Take the context of a chart and then put a specific detail in that context, and then see how it morphs to match the context. You always want to see what's dominant and what's supportive. Charles Manson and Richard Ramirez, their moon situation is dominant, and the other stuff that you'll interpret from the chart is supportive to that. So I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget that if you want to see what order your houses are in, you may have connections between houses that you don't know about, you can go to my website, victorcara.com/H, and get the Houses of Life report that will give you that information and a lot more. Thank you so much.